if you're afraid to hire a contractor, you're not alone. The fear of getting ripped off is real. And the narrative around contractors oftentimes is that they're sketchy and you don't know who to hire. Do you trust the online reviews? Do you trust the services like Homestars and Trusted Pros and Angie's List? Or do you trust word of mouth from your friends? In any case, there are scenarios where they've hired good contractors and bad contractors. Now, as somebody who is, we'll call me a part time casual contractor at this point, and I have been in the industry for, we'll say, I think 17 years, if my math is correct. I've only been the other side. I've only been the contractor. Now, I understand what it's like to deal with people's trust issues, but I don't really know from a non educated standpoint the process of people who are trying to hire someone, their thought process, how they're feeling, what they're valuing. I've never really been able to ask those questions until now. I know I've been away for a little while, and this is a conversation I had with a subscriber named Dev who had reached out to me. We live about an hour from each other and had asked me about doing his basement, and we got to chatting, and he was willing to come on and let me ask him some questions and talk about what it's like to hire a contractor. So, with that being said, thanks for clicking this. Good luck on your project, and let's talk to Dev. So, this all goes back to the email you sent me a few months ago talking about wanting to work together because you were a little, I don't know, want to use the term afraid or insecure. Like you wanted to hire somebody you could trust and were concerned about somebody ripping you off.
Yeah.
Right. And as a contractor or a former contractor, shall we say, I experienced that from the other side to some degree when I met with almost every client. And I have my own points of view on why that is, but I've never really been a client of a contractor because I was one. So I wanted to talk to you and explore really what is maybe behind that, articulate that, because you've been so open with me in our conversations that I wanted to dig a little bit deeper because for sure lots of people feel this. I mean, I feel it coming from them, and I wanted to ask you about that. Like, is it a stereotype that you're used to? Is it things you've heard from people like secondhand who've had this experience? What is it that gives you that hesitancy to hire a contractor?
I would say it's a combination of a few things, right? Like it's not just a bad rap that's been given to the
Mm-hmm.
industry. It's there has to be some truth behind some of the horror stories that people tell. And in this day and age, you kind of rely on what you see online, you read reviews, you read blogs. Like your channel on YouTube itself was like so helpful in just giving me a basic understanding of what all it entails, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then you start digging deeper as a consumer, as somebody who's wanting to get this thing done to their house. And then you start, like I said, reading reviews and blogs and news stories, and you start talking to people, and more often than not it's negative press. Like if
Mm-hmm.
they're I'm not saying that every contractor is there to rip off people, but
Mm-hmm.
more often than not the narrative has a negative connotation. And
Yeah.
for somebody like myself who is new to the country, like I've been here like 7 years, so technically still new. I wasn't born here, right? So
Mhm.
I don't have, like you were mentioning, and we kind of talked about over email, I don't have the network or the support system to guide me in the right direction, right?
Mhm.
To let me know what are some of the most basic red flags. And honestly, again, I would kind of come back to some of the stuff you've done, like your video about how to hire a contractor. That was amazing because
Well,
you
that was based on the conversation that we had on the phone, and I was like, I should probably like delineate because one of the points you made in our conversation was you weren't going to do it yourself. So right, you said I need to hire somebody, and I have hesitancy, and that cued that. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but yeah,
Yeah, no,
carry
absolutely,
on.
that's a great point. um, and kind of like talking about that. So if I'm a consumer who wants to get anything done in their house, we're talking about finishing a basement right now. So if that's my objective, and I have three alternatives, right? Number one is I'm great with tools. I can do everything on my own, so I go and finish it myself.
Mhm.
Number two is I look at companies who are doing this, who are professionals who like it's their business to just finish basements, and there are a bunch of them too.
Mhm.
And number three is looking out for contractors. So I'll give you a breakdown of how I approach this entire process. The first one, like finishing it myself, is not an option for a lot of people in my shoes. Firstly, we don't have the background to do stuff like that. A lot of people who are, especially coming from Asia, have not really done stuff like this because
Mhm.
where they come from, they're experts and then people who take care of stuff like this.
Mhm.
So a lot of people like myself have never even had to pick up a hammer in their entire lives. We went to school for something completely different. We are not engineers. All of us are not, at least, and we just don't have the skills.
Right.
To give you an example, the only time I've picked up a tool to do anything was to hang a couple of paintings, and they
Mhm.
were crooked in the end. Like I couldn't even do that properly. So for me to even think that I can finish my basement is not going to happen. So that's out of the picture. Then the alternative is between hiring a company and a contractor. So I did reach out to a few companies. Uh, Maybe I was off in terms of my expectations, especially from a price perspective.
Mhm.
The kind of quotes I got were outrageous. And again, I'm coming from as an outsider. Maybe that is the going rate. Who knows? But to finish a 700 square feet basement without adding any, additional entrances or a bedroom, like
Mhm.
the only thing was flooring, drywall, and a three-piece bath, right? And my basement is around about 700 square feet. 65,000 dollars for that sounds crazy. And especially again, so the word of mouth, like when you talk to people, they'll be like, oh, you can finish a basement in $25,000, 30 tops, and everything is good to go.
Yeah.
So with that mindset, you reach out to a company and they give you twice of what you were even imagining. So that was a shock to my system. I was like,
Yep.
holy cow. And honestly, I couldn't even afford that at that point in time. I was like, I don't have $60,000 lying around. And then they say, oh, you can finance it and you can do this and that. I don't want debt on my head for
Mhm.
something that is basically just a utility at the end of the day, right? Like the reason why I wanted to get my basement finished was so that I can have a place where my in-laws can come in and help us out with the baby and everything.
Mhm.
So it's not really something that is for me is going to generate any revenue. I'm not renting out my basement. It's for my
Yeah.
personal use. So then I started looking at contractors. I was like, these companies, I can't afford it. And even if you like bargain and negotiate and haggle, firstly, that itself is a long process. And to do that, you need to know the ins and outs, which people like me don't know. Like,
Mhm.
I don't know if this particular subfloor is better than that, or if this insulation is going to cost me $10,000 more or less. Like, I don't know. So I'm
Right.
relying on those experts to be honest and tell me the truth that, bro, you don't need this. Or, you don't need additional sound insulation or soundproofing
Right.
because you are not like this is not a studio that you're creating down there.
Mhm.
So how and when would somebody who is trying to get this done get the right information and then know how to go about the process and how to negotiate with these companies and bring it down to a level where both the parties are comfortable and happy. And then the worst part about this entire journey that I've had and the reviews I read was no matter what you agree on, at the end of the day, they'll come up with some stupid shit, pardon my French, but they will come up with something and be like, oh, this requires another $2,000 and this is broken. So this requires additional 1,500. So it
Right.
always piles on. Like, and I get it. That's the nature of the business. Like nobody can predict what they're gonna find once they start demoing and stuff. But it
Right.
can't be as if somebody's coming to my basement, have a look, and give me a quote, and then be like, "Oh, it's gonna cost you $5,000 more after starting the work." And if that is the
Yeah.
case, like, there has to be some sort of a limit or a check, you know? Um,
It's a very difficult arena to be in, right? Because the economics of it, and you have somebody with a little bit of a business background, the economics of it are something that's not very well defined in any conversation, right? And I would say, to go back to the point you made, I've had anecdotal conversations with friends where you're talking about, you know, 20% of contractors are good, 60% are okay. and then 20% are not good. And
Yeah.
you're absolutely right in that there is something to the stories. And often it is a failure in how they run their business. It is they are good at the work, but these are people who don't have a business background. They aren't trained on how to invoice or how to quote. They learn a lot of that through watching probably their previous boss or trial and error and their own mistakes. If I describe to you the amount of contractors who have just lost money and walked away from things, it would probably change people's opinion a little bit. But anytime money gets involved, people get weird. And
Yeah.
people that is a real test of people's sort of principles, shall we say, right?
Yeah.
And I don't think the economics of what goes on are very well defined. If you talk about wages, I did a calculation years ago. Every $5 an hour is $10,000 a year. So if you stop and think about it, what do you think a good contractor should make? Okay, that's $80,000. Well, that's $40 an hour. So you got to think in that term. But the breakdown, especially now with material costs skyrocketing,
Yeah.
you know, I talked to my old project manager and I asked her, what's the metric you're using when people call you to say, I want to finish my basement? She was using $100 a square foot. And then when I called her recently, she says that's gone up with materials like the price of copper, the price of drywall, the price of ABS piping, the cost of 2x4s. It's all been exponential. And you're a prime example of the demographic that's looking to finish their basement, right?
Yeah.
You have a young family, you want to expand the space. It's not generating income,
Yeah.
but at the same time, it's unrealistic in today's market to just move to have a bigger house.
Yeah.
So there's also no discussion about how people pay for this. I talked to a mortgage broker for one of my old projects. I've never asked a client, "Hey, this is expensive. Like, how are you paying for this?" Like it's not really my place. But he explained to me most people are they're either getting a line of credit on their house or they're getting they're adding it into their mortgage in some way, shape, or form. That, that's a scary thing, especially when you're dealing with contractors who may not have, say, the back end business presentation that everybody kind of wants, and I think you're right. It's a hard road to go. When somebody walks in and be like, yeah, it's going to be 65 grand. And you're like, what does that include?
Yeah. Exactly. The other problem is that they use industry jargons and terminologies
Mm,
that I'm not aware of. Right. So for me to go through a code, I have to copy paste everything that I don't understand into Google, and then I have to read like three articles to figure out, this is what they're talking about, you know?
right.
So that itself is a very time consuming process. The other point is that when it comes to contractors, you are 100% right. I'm not saying that every contractor is out there to
Yeah.
rip people off. There are 100% good people who just want to do a fair job
Mhm.
and give quality work at a fair value, right? Like, they're not in the business of making a buck and moving on. They're
Mhm.
actually, they want to deliver something meaningful to people. But how do I know that that guy I'm talking to is actually that person,
Right.
right? There is no tool, and I have Googled every possible thing when it comes to finding a contractor that would tell you legitimately that this is, these people are good. You can just blindly call them over,
No.
bring them into your house, let them look at your basement and go with them. There's nothing like that available. And I don't think that it could even be made available. So
Well, even if you are, you're paying for that expertise.
yeah.
So you bring them in and you're like, I really like them. And then they give you the sticker shock and you're going, whoa, okay. This so you're it's a no man's land of I really want this great service. I don't want to have to pay, the price of a Lexus to get this done.
Exactly. I'm 100% with you there because that's the problem. Like, so what's the parameter or what's the benchmark that this contractor is good? Is it price? So if anybody who comes in 25, 30, 40% higher than everybody else, is that person good? How do I know that
Mm.
he's not ripping me off? So And I know, like in this conversation, you would hear me talk about being ripped off
Yep.
so much because that's my biggest fear. Because most people, well, pretty much everybody I know, but I'm assuming like at least 90 to 95% people don't have cash or money just lying around to be thrown away.
Mhm.
So if it's a transaction, right? Like if I'm paying for something, I want quality goods and services in return. That's a basic premise of doing business. That's how
Mhm.
capitalism works. So I completely understand that. But I don't want to pay over and above for something which could have been much cheaper or which is an unfair price for the quality of the product and service I'm getting.
Mhm.
And there is no way for people like myself to know that unless we go to Home
It's
Depot and then we start like looking at all the materials and we build that inventory and we're like, okay, so this is how much it's going to cost. Like unless you start nickeling and diming for every single piece of thing that is being put into your
mhm.
basement, there is no way for you to know how much money this person is making. And to be
It,
honest, it's their business. They have to make that money. So
yeah.
you cannot do that. So, I don't know. I'll be 100% honest with you. At this point in time, I'm not even considering finishing my basement anymore because it was such a big
Yeah.
headache. I was like, I give up.
Yeah. I think a lot of people do that, right? They meet a contractor they really like, they get the number, they do the math, and they're like, yeah, I can't afford to do this. I guess it's a reality. And the world today with all the online reviews, those are no guarantee that they're truthful. Like my old company has all 5-star reviews. Does that mean every project went perfect? No, no. And how hard is it to, if you knew how hard it was, and maybe you do, how hard it is to get someone to write a Google review?
Yeah.
That's that in and of itself is difficult. So the the vulnerability that people feel in dealing with a contractor and the transparency that's there, it's not always a good match. You
Yeah.
know, you could go look at the price of drywall at Home Depot, and the truth is the materials for board and tape of a basement are maybe 20% of the cost. You're paying for speed, you're paying for skill, you're paying for all these things, but this is your hard earned money.
Yeah.
And people's homes are very personal, whereas the contractor, it's his job.
Yeah.
And I liken it to kind of like being the prettiest girl in school. When demand is so high, and there's so few of you, you can turn down what you don't want. And
Yeah.
that it leads sometimes to a little sense of, I don't want to say arrogance, but just nonchalance. I'm a big fan of contractors who educate people, who, and all the good contractors that I know, educating people on a one-to-one basis of what they're doing is a big part of their business.
Yeah.
Because when you run into those unforeseens, if I didn't prepare you going in to say, look, here's some possibilities, this is our quote, this is, you're not going to run into extras here, but if we go in and your main plumbing valve fails when we go to shut off the water, there's no way we could have known that was going to happen. So, but there needs to be a process, right? There needs to be some education, some articulation. There needs to be a contract. There needs to be all these basic business principles that, when a guy shows up in dirty work clothes from another job, appearances do matter.
Yeah.
And so when the guy's like, yeah, no problem, we'll take care of this. Yeah, I'll send you the paperwork. There's still some hesitation there, you know? And to your point, when there's no word of mouth within your own circle,
Yeah.
that makes it even harder.
Exactly. To give you an example, I had a couple of contractors come over through word of mouth, through people who've had their basements finished, uh, and they came over, and then it didn't really gel with me. Like the way that they were dealing with me was very, like they were giving me ideas around how to get away without getting a permit to finish a basement. I'm like, I don't want to do that. Like, why? So they were like, you would save $5,000 if you don't get a permit. I can do this in X dollars. Um, $5,000 less than whatever I'm quoting you if you don't get a permit. I'm like, firstly, why would a permit cost me $5,000 when I know that the city charges like $300? Okay, I get it that you need to get an architect to design everything and submit those papers. That can't be $5,000 worth of work. And how about I do that? How about you just give me the drawings and the layout and everything, and I'll go and submit it to the city, and I'll take that responsibility. I'll pay your architect whatever the fair fee is. But again, those are conversations which would
Mhm.
only happen when the other party is willing to have that conversation with you,
Yeah.
right? But somebody who's trying to cut corners in the first meeting and in the first conversation is a red flag for me. Like, I don't want to deal with somebody who's already thinking about how to get away with stuff not being done properly. So I declined them. I was like, thank you very much for coming in, but I don't think this is going to work out, you know?
The only thing we ever did is we would say, if the client wanted to take care of the permit, we would list on the contract permit by other, right? But yeah, you're absolutely right. There's a lot of missing transparencies in those moments. Another red flag is if somebody's like, "Hey, do you want to do this for cash?" To me, like, I
No.
wouldn't I wouldn't walk around handing somebody $5,000 that I don't know. And then as the contractor, if you come to me and say, "Hey, let's do this for cash," I'm kind of going like, "I don't know you." Like, I've been screwed over before, and it's really hard to go home to your wife and go, "Hey, you know that work I've been doing for the last like 2 weeks? I'm not getting paid for that." So like those are tough spots.
Yeah.
But you're
For both
absolutely
parties.
right.
Yeah.
It is the red flags and the hesitation if somebody's doing that and word of mouth, and you just feel it's like me and my car. I feel vulnerable. I take my car in and they're like, "Yeah, you're missing this piece. It's going to be $400." And I was like, "But it was running fine."
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
and
I
and
get
now
it.
you're caught in that
So I actually
spot.
am in the automotive industry. I work for Jaguar Land Rover's agency, so I kind of understand what happens in a car. And you're 100% right. A lot of people feel the same way about getting their car in for servicing, especially if it's a
Mhm.
luxury one, right? Like, I know, like, if you have a Land Rover or a Jaguar and you take it to the dealership to get it serviced, oh boy, God save you. Um, you know, yeah,
Yeah.
you have my sympathies. Um,
Yeah, one of the tough parts is the ability to compare apples to apples. So if they aren't itemizing or being transparent in their quoting process with the document you're getting, if you get 3 quotes, you don't know what's included if
yeah,
they're not all as detailed. I would love to think that all the softwares that are out there now and the contractors I know who are using them aids in that level of transparency, but you don't know. And then when it comes down to the part of if they're cutting corners or they're asking to negotiate, my own position was I never negotiated what it cost, right? I would say, I know my value for what I do. This is fair market value for the tier of product we deliver. If you want to change your scope of work, we can do that, but I won't compromise on the quality of materials or any of that, right? Because we're offering a warranty. I'm not going to put in a product I know I got to come back for.
yeah,
If we were to work together and as much fun as it would be, the only time I would ever want to see you again is like by accident. Like, "Hey, how's it going?" Like, I don't want to get a call from you going, "Hey, this thing you built a year ago, you got to come back and fix this."
yeah,
I wanted the ease of that. The reality is you're paying more for that type of service. But when you get exponentially higher as it is now, is very difficult to swallow. So
yeah.
if you're coming into a scenario where somebody is rightly or wrongly offering to quote unquote save you money, they may not see it the same as you. They may not be as honest with themselves and go, "What does that mean? You're going to save me money. How are you saving me money?" Like, because another thing to think about is your home is probably, depending on your financial philosophy, the biggest asset you have.
Yes.
And if you're going to go doing something to it that hurts that asset, like not getting a permit for your basement or doing subpar work or something that might get damaged, you're damaging that asset, right? So
Yeah, exactly.
it's not a smart thing to do.
Yeah. You actually raised a couple of really important points that I want to mention here. Number one is the whole concept around a warranty, right? So a lot of these contractors that I spoke with didn't even mention it. And if I prodded them and if I asked about it, they're like, "Oh yeah, but we are always here. We're not gonna run away. What? Like we will fix it for you." Like it's all about, "Oh, you have my word." It's a handshake deal. It's not written in paper. The other point is that a few contractors actually gave me a quote as a text. Like they sent me a text um,
Yeah.
on my phone. Like they sent me a text message, which was a quote and which had my address, and they were like, "Okay, this is the address. I'm gonna finish your basement. This is the code for the basement. This is my fee. Blah 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 blah." It was not itemized to the extent that some of the companies, let's say for example,
Yeah.
sent me those codes where I had to, Google what they're talking about.
Yeah.
So that's the other point. And then the final is that a lot of these contractors, especially in the localities and the neighborhoods I'm talking about, they're fly by wire. Like I don't even know if I'll be able to track the person down a year down the line if something
Yeah.
goes wrong. Like there is no proof that he's still going to be around, or if they are actually going to take care of these things if something goes wrong. So
Yeah.
again, that brings me back to the point that there has to be a service where you have quality contractors listed in your neighborhood that you can contact and talk to them and figure out if you want to proceed with them or not, or
Mhm.
some sort of a system or a ranking in place. And I completely agree with you. The whole Google review thingy and home stars and all those, like,
Yeah.
I know how that works, right? So I don't trust it. Unless you have like 5,000 reviews and like proofs of, your pictures and everything, and everybody's like, there has to be like a balance, right? Like I'm not going to trust somebody who has 25 reviews and all of them are 5 star. Like
Yeah.
that never happens.
That's come such a long way over the years. When I
Yeah.
started putting reviews up, not a lot of people had them. And now, like, I think I looked on a website and there was a company that was younger than mine and it said it had 140 reviews. I was like, I've been around 10 years. I have like 20. How do you have 140? Well,
Yeah.
they weren't real. So I think people are becoming more discerning with regards to online reviews. And whenever I talk to other contractors, I'd say the internet is your friend going
And,
forward.
and your enemy.
And if yeah, that too. Uh, but we all live in fear of these bad reviews. And it's just a reality of life that not everything is always going to go perfect. But I try to tell them, put your process online. Figure out a way to put information about how you do things, what you use, so people can understand that when they show up and you talk to them, they know what more about you. And I think the challenge is there are less and less people doing what I was doing and what I am doing. So they don't feel the need because of the demand to do that. Right. Like I know guys who like the ones you experienced, they do it via text. They don't really, they haven't gotten with the times, but then the companies who do use those things, well, they're going to cost more,
Significantly.
because they have infrastructure. They have a shop, they have multiple trucks, they're paying WSIB and payroll remittance and all this stuff. So that all kind of rolls in,
Yeah.
right? And I've had clients go, "Hey, can you break down your quote by labor and materials?" And I'm like, no, no, I can't. Like, because some things is more labor and some things is more material, and you're just adding more work. What I would do and what we would do was a process of, we would go see a project, we would explain to them a budgetary range. We'd say, look, your project is going to cost between X and X. Are you comfortable with that? If you are comfortable in that range, we will then put together a detailed quote for you.
Mm-hmm.
Because
That makes
putting
sense.
that the reality of me putting a quote together is, I'm probably 2 to 3 hours, depending on where you live, to go to your house and meet with you. And I like to chat, so I'm going to be there longer than I need to be. And then it's another anywhere from 4 to 10 hours putting the quote together. Now, I don't want to go through that quote process for you to get the number and ghost me because it's not in your budget or not in your understanding. You expressed something earlier that is real, where somebody goes, "Oh yeah, you could finish your basement for like 25 grand." And then you meet with a contractor and it's more than double and you're blown away. And I run into that a lot. That's why we do that budgetary thing. Like, look, you're looking to do your basement, understand the current times and material costs, and you're looking at anywhere from X to X. Are you okay with that? Because we don't want the stuff that their friends or people they know are telling them to be, the meter stick that isn't real. And that's the scary part because people go, how is it so much more? And I'm like, oh, a 2x4, to clarify, a 2x4 2 months ago was $4. A 2x4 today is 11.
Whoa. Yeah, there you go, right?
And you're
So
like, what do I do with that?
exactly. And a lot of, like, in my case, the people I spoke with had their basement finished pretty recently, like I would say within the last couple of years. But then COVID, right? Everything is more expensive. So if
Yeah,
somebody had their basement done, let's say February 2020, their expectation and their expenses would be drastically different from what I'm going to get done now, because like you said,
totally.
the input cost is so much higher now.
Yeah. The other thing, like even with materials moving, even when they come back down, and this is an underlying thing that most people don't know about, wages in our industry haven't moved in over a decade. So now that prices have gone up and there's less skilled labor, the people who are that skilled labor are now going, well, the market now set the bar here. Well, now I can charge here.
True.
And what does that do? It makes it hard for people with young families and tight budgets to finish their basement.
Exactly. Yeah. Which is a very sad reality of the market
Yeah.
we're in right now. Like, honestly, a couple of years ago, if this entire thing was happening pre-COVID, I'm pretty confident that I would have had my basement finished by now.
I would say basically based on what you described to me, you back then you would have been looking at somewhere between 50 and 55,000 to do. Current prices, I would say will probably be closer to 75,
Yeah.
75 to 80. And that would be a good price.
Yeah.
With you're not putting a kitchen in, you're not putting any of that in. It's just open space.
Yeah.
And I try to explain to people to give them a gauge of their price, right? To give them the context that, okay, how many square feet you got? You say 700. I said, your medium range, good quality laminate flooring is going to be $6 a square foot, supplied and installed. And that's a really
Yeah.
low
Mhm.
price. I should probably be saying, think more like 8. So right there, if you do the math, what's that? $5,600 for your
Yeah.
floor.
Yeah.
So when somebody tells me, yeah, I got my basement done for 25 grand, I'm scared. I'm scared for
Yeah.
those people right there. Because what did those guys put in? The electrician alone is going to be 5 grand.
Yeah.
So
Exactly.
what, what's included in that 25? I'm scared for you. So that's an education that's not out there. That's one of the reasons I kind of made the channel, was to be like, people don't know these things. There's nobody telling them.
Exactly. I think the next project that you should take up is, firstly, create a website. Secondly, on that website, start listing out contractors that you would recommend uh, across the GTA. And then people will just go there. Okay, if Bill is saying this guy is good, he must be good. Let's just call him over.
That sounds like a ton of work. And if you don't know, I'm French Canadian, and putting in more effort than I need to do is just against my genetic makeup. Uh, One of the benefits of living in Guelph, I grew up in Montreal. So I think Montreal's the second largest city in
Yeah.
Canada,
Hmm.
second, third.
Yeah.
Living where I live now, everything is 15 minutes away. My whole life is like 15 minutes apart. There's a lot of jobs that I used to work on where I would come home for lunch,
Wow.
like the, it's a lovely place. Um, But once you get into a big city like the GTA, I start to get anxiety when I go to visit family there because I see all these people and I start to freak out a little bit. But yeah, it really is tough. I'd rather figure out a way to help people discern the reality of the people they're talking to. Exactly what you said before. Somebody comes in and they're already telling you how they're going to cut corners. Like, oh, you don't need to get a permit. It's $5,000. It's more like two and a half. And
Yeah.
there's ways for you to get it done if you want to get it done.
Yeah.
Like one of the videos I'm going to work on is how to complete your permit form in like under
Ooh,
10 minutes.
that's awesome. Yeah.
It's not hard to do, right? Because Ontario has a standardized form. Some of the municipalities may have some smaller additional forms, but it's all standardized because the
Yeah.
building code is standardized. And so it's not that hard to do. And most of them now either have a PDF that you can fill out and print to
Yep.
bring with you, or say here in Guelph, they have it's all online. You can't actually go and submit your permit.
Yeah.
Like contractors can't walk in and hand in a permit. They have to do it all online.
Yeah.
You got to
Same here.
upload your drawings and all of that, right?
Yeah.
So I hope the internet is going to be people's friends
I hope
on
so
this.
too, honestly. And this concept that you were just talking about, like how to fill out that permit form, and tools and resources, maybe free, available online, or maybe at a
Totally.
minimum fee. How can you get those drawings and everything done?
Mhm.
Like there has to be a service that does all that again, which is legitimate, which is not there to just make a quick buck and move on. And then people like myself, we can go and get that thing done. Like if I have a permit already when somebody is coming over, that shows firstly that I'm committed, and then I don't have to worry about that person or wait for that person to get me a permit. If there is availability, they can start tomorrow, you know, if they can.
100%. What you said right there. The more prepared you are, if I walk in as a contractor and you hand me a set of construction drawings, I know I'm in a good place, right? Even if I don't get this job, this meeting is already 2 steps ahead of where I was. If you have all these details figured out, I'm walking into a good scenario.
Yeah.
And that makes my life maybe not easier, but to a degree more enjoyable because I'm talking to someone who's like, okay, I've done my homework.
Yeah.
I know these are the things I need. I know this is kind of where my budget is. And I think I've talked about this in a video too, but the money part is where people get awkward. Because for me as a contractor, I'm going in asking, do you have a budget in mind? Have you worked that out? Instantly, as a human, I would be trepidatious to be like, yeah, here's my budget, because we're all afraid the person's just going to say, well, I'm going to charge you whatever's at the top of your budget. Whereas for us, the reality was somebody has told them they can do their basement for 25,000, and we're trying to vet the fact of whether you're in the right price range.
Right.
You know, somebody once said to me, oh, that's expensive. I'm like, do you know how much a sheet of drywall is? No. Okay, well, I'm charging you 45 grand. I'm not taking all of that home. Like,
Yeah.
there's no cottage in the Muskokas here. So it's hard to have that honest conversation that not a lot of people are good at. And now that I don't have to worry about future business, I just say whatever's on my mind in these videos and just share that. So I hope that those help people, and conversations like this for me are just the greatest return, because I feel like, one, I'm helping you, and there's probably other people out here hearing this conversation that it's helping them.
100%.
And that's the most fun for me. So before we go, Dev, did you have any questions for me? Now that we're here, you may as well get
My
them all out
only,
there.
yeah, like, well, firstly, I want to say how much I appreciate the initial conversation, like a few months ago when we started, on this journey, and to having this conversation right now. It's been pretty amazing, and you've always been there to, guide me and help me out. So kudos and much appreciation there. Um, and I think we've kind of touched about the entire process. What would be really helpful, especially for people who are like myself, who cannot do stuff on their own, is for like a second video about the contractor video that you made, right? Like
Mhm.
make it a series, maybe even like talk about things that people should be looking at, and
Mhm.
the red flags, and how to negotiate with a contractor, maybe, or what are the things which are non-negotiable and things which don't really add that much value to your finished
Mhm.
product, but would maybe save you money or would be significantly more expensive. And I know you have that information across
Yeah.
spread across different videos, and talk about one aspect of the entire project. But I think it would be cool if we can kind of condense it all into a single video, and then people like myself can just go and be like, okay, this is what I
Yeah.
need to do. Hire a contractor. These are the things that I need to look at within the scope of work, and then these are the compromises I'm willing to make if I need to save a buck or two.
Right. Okay. That makes a lot of sense. So if I made like almost like a playlist of smaller videos
Yeah,
where you could say, okay, I'm going to take this in. How do I, what are the, my initial conversation with a contractor? What are the three things I should be asking them or whatever it is, right? Those
yeah,
kind of things.
yeah, for sure.
Right.
And
Right.
if there's
Okay.
a resource, let's say if I'm just making this up, but let's say you believe in Homestar and you think
Right.
that they are amazing people and their reviews are legit. Like, where do I find a contractor? That's my biggest problem right now.
Yeah.
If I, how do I find one? Like, do I just Google people in my area who are in this business? Like, how do I know? You know?
How's this? How do you get somebody that's actually going to return a phone call?
Exactly. Yeah.
I'm doing another project. I'm trying to build a website for another project, and I've reached out to a number of like web developers, and apparently they don't have phones that work.
Yeah.
So I get it. I would totally get it. Yeah, that you know what? I'll work on something like that. I was trying to figure out ways to basically barf out everything that I know onto the internet, and then maybe organize it later. And then, like you talked about, having a website with tools that people could use that they could just
Oh
download
my God.
and
Yes.
operate with. So
Yes.
like it doesn't do me any good. This information, like I can't take it with me. Like when I die, it just dies with me. Not that I'm gonna die soon. That sounds morbid, but
That was pretty morbid.
yeah.
Yes.
But at the same time, what's the harm in putting it on the internet?
Exactly, man. You never know, right? Like, and the one thing which comes across all your videos, Bill, I must commend you on that, is your genuine belief that there are people out there who need your help, and
Yeah.
your selfless way of just letting them know the truth, man. Like, that's so important. When I first spoke with you a few months ago, that's the sense I got. And I was like, man, if I can get this guy to come over and do my basement, like if I can just get him involved somehow,
Yeah.
I would be the happiest person. And I got that feeling from you just by looking at your videos. Like watching a
Right.
few videos gave me that confidence that you're there to actually help people out. So, and again, it's not my place to say any of this, but in the future, if you ever decide to become a consultant, why not? Right? Like there are so
Well,
many people who would love that.
that's something I've thought about doing is like just offering my time for people to be able to click a button and book an appointment and talk to me because I it would be great. I enjoy so much. And I've had a number of conversations with people who have emailed me like the conversation we had
Yeah.
and asked me questions. And I'm happy to share what I know. And I forget, I think it was Ravi who he's like, do you want some money for this? And I was like, nah, it's fine. It's okay. And my wife was like, you should have said yes. I
Yes.
was like, I was like, all right. But yeah, that's definitely something. I looked at a website and like building that out so people could kind of go in, book an appointment, and get 30 or 40 minutes of my time.
Yeah.
And I could do follow up. I could do. There's so many tools out there, right? So I could literally record it like this and then produce a transcript so that they could have that information of our conversation and then offer a follow up and be like, hey, I'll follow up with you in like 2 weeks. And if you have any more questions or you want to email me, knock yourself out. Right. Because it's easy for me to do. Right. But yeah, that's a good idea. I appreciate that. Um, this has been great.
Thank you. Likewise, this was a lot of fun, and it's so good to see you again. And yeah, we'll stay in touch, man. And if
For
things
sure.
change on my end, I will definitely keep you posted. But at this point in time, I've hit pause. The baby's on the way, so I don't want to be distracted with anything at this point in time. I just want to focus on a very pregnant wife and a kid who's on the way.
I think that's an excellent idea.
Thanks.